Hey there, Gospel. We are continuing in our How to Spiritual Growth series. And this one is on how to memorize Scripture. Now, there's a couple of things right off the bat before we talk about methodology or technique for how to do that. Let's talk first of all about your desire or your motivation for why you're going to do that. So, first of all, you have to have a want to. If you're going to memorize scripture and you're going to be successful at it and doing it in terms of a pattern, doing it in terms of a discipline of your spiritual life, then you're going to have a want to. And it's okay to start with, I want to. In other words, I want to please God. I want to have things in my life that are helping me spiritually. I want to do the disciplines. I'm not excited about the discipline itself yet, but I'm excited about the spiritual growth it's going to bring in my life. That's great. That's a wonderful place to start. And if that's where you're starting, then maybe starting with a great verse like Psalm 119, 105. Your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. You can start with the scriptures about what the scripture will do in your life. You can start with a scripture from the New Testament about a promise about how it's sharper than any two-edged sword. So you can start with something that will help to motivate you to want more scripture in your heart and in your mind in order to see more spiritual growth happen. So if you have a desire for spiritual growth, that's a great place to start. If you're already at a place where you want to memorize scripture, that's an even better place to be. So let's talk about two different memorization aspects. First, let's talk about memorizing passages, and then we'll talk about memorizing verses. Throughout scripture, one of the main rules of Bible study is context, context, context. So the importance of the context of scripture is super important. And so it's going to be more beneficial for us. It's going to be a great advantage for us if we memorize a section of scripture or a passage rather than just a verse here, a verse here, a verse here, and a verse here. And so we'll memorize a passage. Now, of course, every passage is made up with multiple verses, but let's talk about how to memorize longer passages. You need to begin by printing it out, getting it on a clean sheet of paper. Your mind works better when what you're working on is clean and separated from other stuff and distractions and clutter. So let your mind get a clean picture of it. And on that clean picture, you want to sit and you want to focus on the words and you want to read it thoughtfully and intentionally. And what do we mean by that? We mean read it slowly, thinking about what does it say, not just what's this word, what's the next word, what's the next word. You're not trying to memorize words, you're memorizing scripture. And so you want to memorize the meaning, you want to memorize the context, you want to memorize the flow. All of that comes together. And when you see all that put together, it makes remembering the words much, much easier. So you want to read it thoughtfully and intentionally. Give yourself about 10 days to do this. Once a day, every day, sit down and read through thoughtfully, intentionally the passage that you're trying to memorize. After 10 days, begin then to start at the beginning and see how much of it you can say without looking. Now, once you get stuck or you get confused or you're not sure what's next, it's okay to look. Go ahead and look. You would much rather correct your first mistake so that you say it right the rest of the time than to go another 10 days saying it wrong, getting it locked into your mind wrong, and then having to figure out how to correct that afterward. So after 10 days of reading it, begin to go 10 days of trying to say it as much as you can, and then look when you need to. After you've gone through that second set of 10 days, you want to really begin to emphasize and focus on saying as much of it as possible without looking. Go through that process, and probably in about 30 days, you'll be able to say much or most of that passage. So let's talk about memorizing verses. The key with memorizing verses is just simply repetition, repetition, repetition. Just brute force going after it time after time after time after time. And you'll memorize that verse very quickly if you just go over it and over it and over it once, twice, 10, 20, 30 times. Now let's talk about two things not to do. One, don't memorize things that you're not understanding and that don't make sense. If you're looking at verses like in 1 John 2:12, where it says that Jesus is our propitiation, and you don't know what propitiation is, go look it up. If you don't understand the flow of the passage, sit and outline it. because if you don't understand it, it's going to be hard for you to memorize it. Secondly, don't expect this to happen overnight. Don't expect to sit down with First John chapter 2, read through it 3 or 4 times, and think that your mind's supposed to have it locked in and you're just going to run through it and you're going to memorize books of the Bible at a time, a week at a time. It's not going to happen. It's going to take time, and it's going to take some review to keep those things locked in over time. But as far as getting them into your brain to begin with, let's go for passages. And a chapter or so is a really good place to start for passages. 10 days chunks, and really push yourself after those second 10-day chunks. And for verses, just repetition, repetition, repetition. I believe you'll be amazed at how much God uses scripture in your mind and heart when you've locked it into your mind, because as you've locked it into your mind, it's had all that time to work on the inside, on your soul and your spirit. I believe you'll be surprised at how much God does with these scriptures. I believe you'll be excited about memorizing more after you get started.